as Trump announces Venezuela oil plan. US seizes ship flying the Russian flag. High seas, shadow ships, billions at stake. What are ghost fleet ships? Venezuela's secret bid to bypass the dollar?
Hello and welcome to this episode of Xplained by NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra, and in the next 15 minutes I'm going to tell you about ghost ships. Now you might ask why we are dedicating an entire broadcast to what sounds like a maritime myth. Well, here is a concrete reason. On 7th of January 2026, the high seas became the theatre for a massive geopolitical showdown. The United States seized two ghost fleet tankers linked to Venezuelan oil exports. The first, the Marinera, originally registered as the Bella 1, was intercepted in the North Atlantic. This ship had been under surveillance for weeks. In an attempt to evade the US blockade, it reportedly painted a Russian flag on its hull and changed its name mid-voyage. However, that did not stop the US Coast Guard from boarding the vessel between Iceland and Scotland. Simultaneously, in the Caribbean, a second tanker, the Mount Sophia, was seized, and these ships weren't just carrying cargo, they were carrying billions of barrels of Venezuelan crude, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. These seizures follow the military raid on the 3rd of January 2026, where US forces captured Nicolas Maduro in Caracas, effectively placing the Venezuelan oil industry under direct American pressure. Why is the Trump administration doing this is the big question. Well, the stated goal is to fix and manage Venezuelan oil for the benefit of both Americans and the Venezuelan people. Trump has noted that the revenue from these sales will be held in the US-controlled accounts. He stated on social media platform Truth Social that Venezuela will use this money to purchase only American-made products. The Trump administration has said that maximum pressure is necessary to rebuild Venezuela's dilapidated infrastructure and ensure the wealth benefits the people rather than what they termed the Maduro regime. Essentially, Washington is now acting as the gatekeeper for the world's largest proven oil reserves. The goal, as stated by the White House, is to ensure that Venezuela oil is sold at market rates rather than at the heavy discounts previously offered to allies like China or Cuba. Let's break down the concept of a ghost ship. In the modern context, we are not talking about Mary Celeste or supernatural apparitions. We are talking about the shadow fleet, a multi-billion-dollar industry designed to keep oil moving despite sanctions. A ghost ship is a commercial vessel that disappears from the global regulatory grid. They achieve this through three main methods. Number one, going dark ships turn off their AIS transponders so they cannot be tracked by satellite. Number two, identity fraud. The ships use flags of convenience, frequently switching registrations between the different nations to confuse maritime authorities. Number three, complex ownership. Ships are owned by a web of shell companies, often with no physical office, making it impossible to serve legal papers or identify the true beneficiaries. There are three factual reasons why ghost ships are a primary way out for countries like Venezuela. Reason number one, bypassing the dollar. Ghost ships operate outside the Western financial system. They use non-Western insurance and settlement methods, allowing oil to be traded without touching the US banking system. Reason number two, ship-to-ship transfers. These vessels often meet in the open ocean to transfer oil by blending Venezuelan oil with other crudes. The origin of the product is disguised. This allows the oil to enter markets, including sometimes in Asia, under a different clean label. Reason number three, diplomatic shields. By flying flags of nations like Russia or Iran, these ships try to use international law as a shield. They bet that the US will not risk an international incident by boarding a foreign flagged vessel. However, as the 2026 seizures prove, that shield is currently being ignored by Washington. This tactic works because the shadow fleet exploits loopholes in international maritime governance. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a ship is generally subject to the laws of the nation whose flag it legitimately flies. But when a vessel broadcasts false data, switches identities, or shifts flags without proper registry, it effectively becomes stateless, a condition that many ghost ships exploit to operate beyond the reach of usual enforcement measures. This chaotic legal status makes high seas interception extremely difficult and until recently afforded a degree of impunity to those trading in sanctioned oil. To give a real-world example from this very moment, when the Bella 1 attempted to evade US surveillance last month, it briefly sailed under a hastily claimed Russian identity. Russian state media later broadcast footage suggesting naval assets were shadowing the tanker, though Western officials maintained no active escort was present at the moment of the seizure. Russia subsequently condemned the US action as a violation of maritime law. Why does this matter? Well, because ghost ships are not a niche maritime anomaly. They represent a systemic mechanism by which sanctioned states have been able to sustain oil revenues in defiance of Western embargoes. And in a world where energy resources are central to geopolitical influence, these tactics have become deeply embedded in broader strategic competition. Past instances and historical context of ghost ships. Although the seizures in January 2026 brought ghost fleets into the headlines, their use has deep roots in recent sanctions history. The shadow fleet phenomena first gained international attention during the intensification of US and European sanctions on Venezuela and Iran in the late 2010s and 20s, when traditional shipping companies avoided sanctioned cargoes to protect insurance coverage and corporate reputations. State-linked actors started using older tankers with opaque records to keep trade flowing. One of the earliest documented cases was the tanker Skipper, seized by US forces off the coast of Venezuela in December 2025. The ship had been sanctioned years earlier for its role in transporting Iranian crude, often under manipulated identities and falsified navigational data, before it was forcibly boarded and confiscated. Another notable pattern involved the use of zombie or repurposed vessels. Some ghost ships use the names and registration numbers of retired tankers to mask their true identity. For example, Bloomberg tracked vessels like Varada disguised their movements and origins through stolen identities, false AIS transmissions, and staged ship-to-ship transfers in remote waters, all designed to obscure sanction-busting activity. Across multiple incidents, ghost ships have played a key role in long-distance oil shipments that otherwise would be impossible under sanctions. For instance, several Venezuelan and Iranian shipments, often totaling millions of barrels, were delivered to Chinese ports by vessels that disabled tracking systems and relabeled both ships and cargo en route. These operations not only undermined sanctions but also created complex legal disputes over ownership, jurisdiction, and liability. Historical precedents show two things. Ghost fleets are not a new invention. They emerged in response to sanctions and have evolved rapidly as enforcement tightened. They have been remarkably effective until now. US enforcement actions like the January 2026 seizures represent a significant shift from primarily financial and regulatory penalties to direct maritime intervention, potentially redefining how sanctions are enforced on the high seas.
As Trump announces Venezuela oil plan, US seizes ship flying the Russian flag. High seas, shadow ships, billions at stake. What are ghost fleet ships? Venezuela's secret bid to bypass the dollar?